Welcome to the Social CRM Technical Setup Instructions. We're going to start off today by going to Bluemix, where I've created a new Node.js application, and I have created 4 new services that I've binded to this new application. Obviously your application name would be different than mine, and you can reuse some of these services if you want to. Just note that although the application does support the free versions of all of these services, the application will run better if you use a paid subscription, as you will run into API call limitations very quickly on the free services. Once you've created the application and you've binded these services to the new application, you can switch over to configuring Twitter. Okay, so the next step would be to create your Twitter account, which you would just do in a normal process of creating a new Twitter account, provide some unique screen name, provide an email address and a phone number. You need to have the phone number to be able to use the development API for Twitter. So once you've done that, you can go to the dev.twitter.com URL and select My Apps to go into the application management console for Twitter, where you can create a new application. I'm not going to go into this application, as it does contain keys, tokens and secrets that is unique to my application, and it does cause a security risk if anybody else sees this. But you would create an application, give it some name, and then generate both the tokens and the keys for this application. Leave this page open, as you will reference this in the next setup steps. One of the most important steps in setting up this application is to edit the manifest file. You can do this in a text editor or just using VI from the command line, but as you can see, there's a manifest YAML file, and what this does is it does give you a way of deploying the application when you do CF push, but the name and host needs to be specific to your application. So whatever the application name is that you created in Bluemix is the one that you need to update the host and the name in this file too. If you don't do that, you will not be able to deploy the application. So the next step in the configuration process is to configure your local code to use all these credentials and tokens that you've generated so far, as well as prepare the code base to be deployed to Bluemix. So the first step in this process is to, as per the README file, copy the envvars example JSON and vcap local example JSON files to their particular names without the example. This is important, as the next steps won't complete if you haven't done this before already. The next step is to run npm install to install all the dependencies for both the server and the client, and then the following step is to run npm run build client, like so, and that will build and compile the client code and prepare it to be deployed to Bluemix. If you don't do that, your application will not function properly. The last step here is to run npm run setup, and this is actually a setup utility that will guide you through configuring all the different components for this accelerator. We will start with Cloudant, and what this does is it will ask you for the username and password for your Cloudant instance, which you can of course get from your connections page of your application in the view credentials. You can just copy and paste them from there, and it would create the databases as well as load the designs and indexes required to run this application. The next step would be to configure Twitter, and here the setup utility will ask you for all your tokens and keys and secrets that you've generated when you went to this application management console and you created your application and you generated the keys. It will also ask you for the Twitter screen name that you would like to monitor, and this you can find by going to Twitter. So let's take, for example, I want to monitor something from Verizon. So you can start by saying @Verizon and you will see that it brings up a list of Verizon tweet screen names, Twitter screen names, and you can pick one. So be careful though, these are case sensitive. So let's say for our example we want to monitor Verizon support. We can go in there and you can copy this value here and use that as the screen name that you would like to monitor. As I said, they are case sensitive, so you need to use the exact case. The next step would be to specify your bot screen name, and this would actually be the screen name that you use for your account. So in my case it's Watson for Air. You have to use your own specific screen name there. You also need to point these to two conversation instances. You can find some more detail of this in the README. The first conversation workspace would be your classification workspace, where we use conversation intent detection to classify the tweets for you. And the second workspace would be your actual dialogue that would feed the or serve the chatbot interaction. So just as you go through these configuration steps and the setup steps, read the instructions as it goes through, and you will be able to set this up. The next step would be to test Twitter, and what that does is it would actually use the parameters that you've provided here and connect to Twitter and listen for tweets on a very limited basis. It's only 10 tweets, but that should give you a good enough indication whether all your configuration has been set up correctly. If you do run into problems, you can run this setup utility again and provide the updated values. You can read some more about the search Twitter function in the README file. Okay, so once you've done that, you can exit out of the utility and do your CF push and push this application to Bluemix.